All right. Welcome, everybody, to our eco discussion for this month focused on food with Mel Lions from Wild Willow Farm.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome to have you here with us, Mel, and I'm really excited about our discussion tonight.
Likewise, thanks for including my voice.
Heck yeah, you've got an important and wonderful voice to share to this discussion. So I'll give a little context to the container of this discussion, and then I'll give more of an introduction to Mel. So my name is Joshua Alvord, and I started a nonprofit organization in 2012 called Local Earth. And we are in the process of the first phases of an eco-village project up here by Valley Center, where we're testing out and implementing as many of these concepts and practices as possible. And we have created this educational program called the Ecological Lifestyle Immersion, where each month we focus on a topic. Last month was water, this month is food, next month is shelter. And we provide baby steps, medium steps, giant leaps in that area of life that people can take to live in a more ecologically balanced way. So that's a little bit of the context of this discussion. Each month we have a discussion with a visionary or an expert in the field, and that is what has led us to Mel, who is definitely a visionary and expert and amazing human being. So I have this wonderful introduction from Mel. So I'm just going to go through it right here. Mel is the program manager and founder at Wild Willow Farm. San Diego was a much different place when his family moved to the area in 1959. Growing up in Coronado, Mel remembers farms and dairies in Imperial Beach, Chula Vista, and Mission Valley. His family was eating the best locally sourced dairy and produce from the Tijuana River Valley. But in the 1960s, in San Diego, this wasn't an expression of hipsterism. It was where much of our fresh produce and dairy products came from. In the 1970s, Mel went into the restaurant business and bought locally grown produce and dairy products from vendors in downtown San Diego. But a quiet transformation from a local to a global food system was underway, leading to the tragic loss of local farms, dairies, and the collective memory of the importance of having fresh food producers in our community. Old food from far away is not as delicious or nutritious as what is grown by local farmers. This loss spurred him to help form San Diego Root Sustainable Food Project in 2005 as a vehicle to educate fellow citizens of the importance of local farms and fresh food. Realizing that an educational farm was needed for that mission to be effective and engaging, Wild Willow Farm was established in 2010. Mel loves giving farm tours, mingling his personal story with botany, farming practices, human and ecological health, regional and human agricultural history, and of course, goats. He's a left-handed, saxophone-playing, pizza-making body surfer and has been a vegetarian since 1976. In 2014, Mel was voted Cox Conserve's Hero Volunteer of the Year for San Diego County in recognition of his long-standing service on behalf of San Diego Roots and Wild Willow Farm. Mel continues to volunteer full-time on behalf of the organization and the local food movement. So based on that amazing introduction and information, it really is an honor to be here with you, Mel. I have so much respect for you in the humbleness and the integrity with which you walk and the amount of wisdom you have to share with everyone. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Well, likewise, I'm honored to be in the discussion with you. And what you're doing up there in your eco-village is very dear to my heart, and I think an important aspect of what we need to do now to find new ways to live in ecological lifestyles. And so you're undertaking something that I hope is going to be refined and replicated and be a seed for other organizations and other eco-villages all throughout the planet. For it's only when we really come into harmony with the environment around us that we will really be fully human and fully integrated into planet Earth.
Heck yeah. So Mel and I, we wanted to keep this a pretty organic discussion. We didn't want to have it scripted. And so we have a couple basic talking points that we'll go through. And for this moment, I'd love to have a little interaction from the audience, the people that are live on the conversation right now. So in the little chat window, if any of you would like to type in like what your biggest concern is about the local food system in your area. And as Mel and I are talking, we can check in to the chat window and see what some of you say and see if that sparks any ideas in the conversation. So one of the first things we said, Mel, was like, how is food grown, the difference between the practices of like commercial growing, organic, regenerative practices. And so let's kind of just spark you on that topic.
Well, the term regenerative organics is probably new to a lot of people. It's really emerging from the idealistic core that was behind the organic food movement. Basically, before the organic food movement was there formally, it was there very informally as pushback against what had become of the food system through industrial agriculture. That really started accelerating after World War I and then picked up tremendous steam after World War II. And rather than having systems of local farms around cities, which is the history of the world, all of civilization, all cities on the planet had farms around the cities from which the fresh produce came from. That was in existence for 10,000 years, and then starting about 70 or 80 years ago, that started changing. And food became grown in larger and larger farms using more chemicalized methods, heavily dependent on pesticides and fertilizers rather than things that came out of nature. Science was getting involved in agriculture and really accelerated the ability for farmers to grow lots of single crops on larger and larger pieces of land. Part of the outcome of that is that we started losing a lot of small farms. They couldn't compete against these larger farms who had the benefits of economy of scale. And small farmers started leaving rural areas, moving into the city, which created increasing dependence on less locally grown food that was grown farther and farther away from where it was eaten. And that pretty much describes commercial agriculture. It's food grown really for profit, without really much care or concern for flavor or nutrition. And I'm talking especially like produce, things like grains and beans or food that stores well. That stuff's always been transported around the world since we had camel trains. That's not the kind of food I'm really talking about. I'm thinking of fresh produce, what grows in a garden. And that started becoming farther and farther away from where it was eaten. And the trade-off for that was that it was not picked when it was ripe and ready. It was picked for transportation. It was picked to be shipped around the planet rather than from what the inherent nature of the produce is, of that plant's fruits are. And not taking advantage of nature's way of ripening food at peak flavor and peak nutrition. This is what nature does, but man has intruded on that process. Industry has intruded on that process and has engineered foods that are made for being shipped longer distances, being picked early before the plants that fruit ever had a chance to ripen in the sun. much nutrition is derived from sun ripening your tomatoes or your cucumbers or the things that we love eating in the summertime, especially. And those, it's been at a tremendous loss and degradation to environmental issues, human nutrition. And so commercial agriculture, while it's been a commercial success, has really made us sick, and it's making the planet sick. And that's not, I don't find that acceptable. So kind of as a pushback against commercial agriculture, there was always this kind of army, a hidden army of people who were idealistic growers, people, men and women who had small farms near cities where they could grow food using ethical practices and then transport them into their neighborhoods or the communities near them. And as those practices became defined in the 50s and the 60s, it turned into what we now call organic agriculture. And it was largely practiced by, idealists and hippies and people who were maybe a little marginalized from society. And for a long time, organic food was considered marginal food. But organic farmers persisted, and sometime in about the 80s, people were starting to awaken to the fact that the food grown commercially was going to be affected with pesticide residues, that the flavor and the nutrition was not there, and started wanting to have the produce that was a little more in line with what they remembered as a child. And I went through this process myself. I remember back, in the 60s when I was growing up, I loved vegetables and fruits. I just thought that was the most delicious things. And then when I became an adult, something happened, and I thought, and the food just didn't taste as good. I'd eat a peach and just be disappointed that it wasn't. It looked like a peach. It smelled like a peach, but it didn't taste anything like the peach I remembered. And then that started happening across all the different kinds of vegetables and fruits that we grow. Tomatoes are a real huge example. You cannot get the flavor of a vine-ripened tomato in a store. It just doesn't happen. And that whole issue has gotten worse and worse over time. So this pushback by the idealists and the hippies became to be known as organic agriculture. It was people who didn't want to have poisons and pesticides used to grow food. And they were able to get a little bit more for their money because people demanded it more than the cheap commercial food that they could get easily. They started finding locally grown organic food, and were willing to pay a little bit more for that. And the commercial growers started noticing that. So in the 80s, the hippies at the farm stand next to the commercial growers were getting more money for their tomatoes than the commercial grower could get. And they wanted to get in on that. And they started lobbying Congress to develop national organic standards. Prior to the national organic standards, organic was largely certified among farmers or coalitions of farmers who set standards of practice, the original organic standards that had a pretty severe regime. You had to do this, you could not do that. Those were the parameters that qualified one as an organic grower. But they were set by the farmers who were invested in this style of growing. So in the 80s, the commercial growers wanted to get in on that, so they didn't want to go through the certification of all these hippies. They wanted to get the government in on it. So the big growers and then big sellers like Walmart's and Costco's and great big vendors, the big grocery store chains, they lobbied Congress to set a national organic standard, which initially I thought was a pretty cool idea. Like, oh, cool, organic food, that's going to get it's going to have a national standing. It's going to be something that you can go anywhere and get organic food. I thought that was a really good thing. But what happened is that the standards, the protocol set up by these idealists got watered down. They turned into something that would be kind of make me cringe. The practices that are allowed in organic growing are just not nearly as robust. They allow practices and chemicals that technically they can call them organic because the government says they can be organic, but they're not things that I would want to use. I wouldn't want to have on or in my food. I wouldn't want to have the practices used to grow that organic food used widely because they're destructive to the environment. And so what we've created is essentially organic food anymore is largely the same as commercial food using different chemicals. It uses largely the same practices. The chemicals are better. The one really clear advantage that I think is really important is that genetically modified foods are not allowed under organic. I think that's a really important distinction. So for that reason alone, I think organic food is important. And I don't want to diss organic food too much. I'll diss it a little bit, but I don't want to diss it too much because it's the only standard we have above no standard. If we have no standard as the only standard, we're cooked. So organic food allows somebody to know that they're getting something that's less harmful to the environment, but I don't really think that it's not harmful to the environment, largely. Now, there are lots of really good ethical growers growing organically, using practices that I fully embrace, that I think are living and growing ethically, ecologically, and helping to build an ecological farm where the food is being grown in a manner that's harmonious with nature. So those kind of define the two predominantly known forms of agriculture, commercial and organic. But I'm excited to say that there's a new level emerging by some of the leading pioneers of the organic movements. And this is called regenerative agriculture. And it is something that's built upon the organic standards, but has much more stringent growing requirements. First and primarily, it requires that the grower develop their soil as a living organism. And that's not something that's completely lost in most commercial practices or organic commercial practices. The soil is just never developed. It doesn't really turn into something that's alive. Regenerative farming is all about living healthy, building healthy soil, teeming with microbes, alive, just as the soil, the plants above the ground are alive, the soil below the ground is just as alive, and maybe even more so. It's got huge biodiversity. It's got microbes, bacteria, fungus, mycorrhiza, nematodes, worms, all these things that are alive, and they're all feeding a system of ecology that feeds the plants and makes those plants healthy and robust, and really eliminating or reducing the need to use any kinds of poisons or sprays. A healthy plant growing in healthy soil is able to fend off pests and diseases that would come and attack it. So that's just a simple thing, but there's all these other aspects of the regenerative model that I think are just as important. For one, healthy living soil is full of carbon, and utilizing plants' photosynthesis, their natural way of photosynthesis, they're breathing in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and then they're depositing it into their structures and into the soil itself. So utilizing regenerative practices means that we can sequester carbon from the atmosphere and store it in the soil. The important thing is to be able to keep it in the soil. So there are lots of the regenerative practices that are defined so that the soil retains that carbon. It's not lost through tillage or other practices such as poisons and pesticides, even organic ones. So all kinds of other aspects of regenerative agriculture include managed grazing, so that we can, rather than having farm animal, excuse me, having farm animals depleting our soils and eroding them, farm animals used properly will regenerate the soil. And the best example of that is right from nature herself. The prairies in the Midwest used to be populated with buffaloes and antelopes, and were huge grasslands that lasted for tens of thousands or 100,000s or millions of years. They were stable environments. When Europeans arrived and started carving that land up and plowing it, the Dust Bowl resulted, so that soil blew away. We destabilized the soil itself, and it blew away and created disaster and famine and, and poverty. So that's just one example, but it really can be more subtle than that. And it's a way that by adopting these regenerative practices, we can restore our agricultural lands, we can restore pastures, we can sequester carbon from the atmosphere. And in Southern California, something that's really important, because we live in a desert, that carbon-rich soil will hold water. The water that we bought to irrigate our plants with, it holds it in the soil. It's less prone to evaporation or disappearing back down into the water table. The regeneratively alive soil holds water just like a sponge. You can measure the water in small amounts, and it will stay right where the plant needs it.
So a lot of this sounds like a very important part is building the healthy soil, like one of the foundational elements. And when you said certain practices help maintain the process of carbon sequestration and maintaining the carbon in a better way, what, like you mentioned, the options of like no tilling, what are a couple of those practices in the regenerative agriculture kind of umbrella are used to do that?
The no-tilling thing to me is really exciting, and it's even a little radical, because you think of the history of agriculture. The plow has been the tool farmers have used since we really started, and it's only now that we've kind of, modern science is starting to understand some of these things, that if you can get your land to the point where you do not need to plow anymore, you don't need to till, you don't need to turn the soil, where you can leave the soil stratified as it builds itself, with some things living near the top of the surface of the soil, other things living deep, lots of other things in the middle. All these living organisms find their right place, where their ecosystem is perfect, where their food sources are, where their climate and their water and their air needs are fine. They get to these places where it's a really stable environment, and this biological engine starts cooking, and it starts building upon itself. So if you come and take that engine that's cooking along and you rip it up with a plow, all of a sudden you've disturbed this network that may have taken months or years even to establish. You've disturbed that network, and all these things who were in their perfect place are no longer there anymore. And then you start getting die-offs. The organisms die, and then all the effort that you and the plants that you're growing have put into putting that carbon into the soil starts evaporating out. So really the key in regenerative agriculture is maintaining stable carbon in the soil. Tillage destroys that. Tillage disturbs that, such that you can undo a lot of, or years or months of work in a moment.
And so it sounds to me like the scales of production and the scales of crops, at what size, how much acreage, how much land we're using, can tie into concepts of like monocrops and monocultures, and tying a little bit into like the Eco Village project that we're working on is how we integrate more small scale, like community farms, community gardens, because I think in my mind, when you're talking about, in a prior conversation we had, of sometimes the harm that like a tractor can do when you're driving over and compressing that soil, and the fact of tilling it. And so it feels to me like it would, without some of these tools like the tractors and stuff, it would be, are we looking at doing smaller scale farms that are with more appropriate technology, which does relate to principles of ecologic sustainability? And I mean, how many tools and infrastructure we're using, and big tractors versus smaller tools. So what, could you speak a little bit to how you see kind of the scales of farms as we move forward and try to support this concept of regenerative agriculture?
That's a really important point. I'm a big advocate of smaller scale farming, especially urban farming within our cities. So the food can be picked when it's ripe and ready and eaten then. But the practices I'm describing are really best suited towards small scale farming. And I think there's all kinds of other aspects of small scale farming that are important enough that, I would like to see that kind of a shift made from being large farms growing one thing or two things or whatever it is, essentially having a biodiversity of one, to having small scale farms with great big biodiversity, growing a big range of different crops that are rotating through all the time, increasing the biodiversity tremendously. So it's not only the biodiversity of what's above the soil, but what's below the soil and even in and around the farm itself. You can measure the health of an ecosystem by the biodiversity. The healthier the ecosystem, the higher the biodiversity. The more degraded ecosystems will have a very low biodiversity. So if you look at the average commercial farm, that has a biodiversity of one. There's one thing growing because the farmer has taken every opportunity to kill everything else. Whatever kind of weeds or other plants are growing, certainly all the bugs, everything else, and then the result is that the soil itself, the microorganism of the soil itself dies. So, well, those big scale farms have a biodiversity of one, unless of course the farmer's on his tractor, then this is a biodiversity of two. So maybe if he has his dog, there's a biodiversity of three. But I'm a big fan of having an unmeasurable, huge biodiversity on your farm, growing dozens of different kinds of plants and crops, growing some things not for production, not because you're going to pick it and sell it, but because it increases the biodiversity and it draws in other things into the farm, other beneficial insects, pollinators, things that will help improve the whole ecology of the farm itself. And I think food grown this way offers great measures of benefits to the planet, to the ecosystems around us, and making something that's a planet that's worth living on. We don't know where our food comes from, and it's coming from places that are very, very degraded. Farms basically have about the same kind of biodiversity as Antarctica or the Sahara Desert, or places that are really the most degraded places on the planet. That's where our food's coming from. This is the place we're supposed to be getting our food and our nutrition. We depend on these things. This is kind of our primary connection point with nature itself. We drink water, we breathe air, but we have to have that food in order to make our bodies resonate and become active. And it's not just the food, it's not just the running our machine bodies, like you put fuel in your car. We're really energizing. Our food feeds our emotions and our thoughts, our imagination, our aspirations. The food drives all these things. And if we're giving a higher quality food, it makes all of those things so much higher. We're giving the best of ourselves rather than just kind of running on neutral, just making it work, getting by. We're going to get there, someday. maybe we won't. But I want to see us alive and activated and engaging in our world with each other and with the world around us.
Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
I love it when you get excited. Wow. So many directions we can go from here. It feels like the ecological component and the health and nutrition component like really tie together. Like they're supporting one another in the practices that seem to be more healthy for the ecosystem, and the planet as a whole seem to also be more healthy for the humans and the local community. And you've mentioned a few times as seeing food as a more ecological practice or endeavor rather than a business endeavor. And so I guess how we start to, I think through conversations like this and educate people on what they value in life, if it's to save 50 cents on the commercially produced tomato, like it's like how we start to shift those mindsets that people understand that's going to be better for them and the environment and the ecosystem. So how do we start to, shift these values in kind of more mainstream society, do you think?
Well, it wasn't that long ago that organic food was pretty marginalized. It's kind of like, eye rolls. Oh, you're one of those. You eat organic food. And that was kind of common for us who wanted that. But people started understanding what that meant. And people started demanding it. So we have organic food available in all the supermarkets because consumers demanded it. There is tremendous power that we have in what we choose to buy, what we want to eat, that will drive the market. So we have to be willing. Back in the day, people were happy to pay twice as much for organic food because they knew they weren't feeding poison to their family. That made a big difference. That drove the market. Whereas commercial agriculture is really kind of going the other way, trying to cheapen food more and more and more, really kind of a race to the bottom. How cheap can we make food? The trade-off being that the things that make food vital get left on the side in order to maximize that production and that profit. So we have to take a different approach. It's like we have to find and appreciate and be willing to spend a little bit more to get something that's at that higher quality. And we've already proven it can be done. Organic food's available all over the country because of that. Because consumers decided that was important to them. That's what they wanted to feed their families. So we have that much power. We just have to make that known to the people who are making those decisions about what goes onto the produce shelves. So this is where, the regenerative food is, it hasn't been quite defined. There's teams of people working on this really hard to come out with standards that can be published and certifications that can be established so that small farms like Wild Willow Farm and other small farms who always have embraced those ecological farming practices can then get a sign on their farm stand that says regeneratively grown. And then people showing a willingness to pay a little bit more because it takes more time, a little more effort. You're not relying on lots of efficiencies with tractors and things. You're relying on the slow motion of nature. Nature evolves quite slowly, but it evolves steadily. And it takes some time. So we have to factor that into what we're willing to pay for. So rather than trying to find the cheapest food possible, we can drive the market by looking for something of higher quality and be willing to pay for it. Now, I've been eating organic food since the 70s. I've never had much money to my name. It was not that I was wealthy enough that I could afford organic food. it was important to me that I would make myself be able to afford that. I shaped my life so that I could eat food that was less poisonous than what was otherwise out there. So I know there's a lot of aspects to people's economies. There's all kinds of stresses on our world's costs that skyrocketing, rents and healthcare and all kinds of other things that really do affect people's ability to buy. But it's important that we still can make a difference by making sure that when you see these signs, when they become available, when you see regeneratively grown food, seek it out, get it. Show the market that you're wanting to see that happen. You're going to be investing in that change. You, as a citizen, we don't have to depend on a government to do this. We have that much power. So I want to just encourage everybody to embrace their power, hold it, carry it, use it, because we make this change happen.
And that's a great kind of segue to what was going through my head of it being voting day at the polls and talking about government and who is spearheading this regenerative agriculture movement at the moment. And I had shared with you, the first time I'd seen it was on some of the Dr. Bronner's soap products recently. I've been seeing them promote it. And is it a California-based thing right now, or who's kind of bringing this up into the mainstream world?
It's actually kind of broad-based. I think the kind of efforts being spearheaded by the Rodale Institute. Rodale has been published in the Organic Gardening magazine for decades, since the 50s or 40s maybe. They were really one of the pioneers of the organic movement, and now they're really spearheading this regenerative agriculture movement. And then there's lots of kind of idealistic growers who are embracing this concept. And then companies like Dr. Bronner's. Dr. Bronner's is a San Diego-based company. It's pretty much the only soap I've used on my body for 40 years. It's amazing soap, ethically produced, environmentally right. They source things with fair trade products from around the world. They're really a quality product. So they have this kind of ethos embedded into their corporate culture. And they've been using the power of consumers to use some of that money that they earn to help push the human evolution a little bit, human commercial evolution a little bit farther. So they are one of the main funders and advocates for this new regenerative farming movement. And I just am so thrilled for their engagement and their enthusiasm in supporting this kind of work.
Beautiful. And where's the Rodale Farm or Institute?
Oh gosh, caught me there. I think they're back in Virginia or Pennsylvania or someplace back east.
Okay.
Farther away than El Cajon.
Okay. So are there any farms right now that are kind of prototype demonstration sites for some of these that you know of anywhere in the country or anywhere here in San Diego area?
Yeah, there are some. Well, certainly Wild Willow Farm and Education Center is one of them.
Okay.
We've been, before that was a defined term, we were utilizing and teaching these practices since we started it, really our farm school in 2012. So Wild Willow Farm down the Tijuana River Valley, South San Diego, we have classes and workshops. We train new farmers in how to use these practices. And kind of the philosophy behind all these things, not telling you what to do, but encouraging you to think about how things work in an interactive way with the ecology. Because we're in a very specific kind of climate, but not all farms are. We're in a very extreme kind of climate, but these practices can be utilized anywhere. There are lots of small farms who use these to one degree or another. I think probably the smaller the farm, the better chance they're going to be using some of these practices. I wish I could name off a bunch more, but I'd probably leave some out and they'd get mad at me. So.
the context of this discussion of being like ecologically mindful and how we source our food and our nutrients that we need. So we've talked a lot about the process itself and the different practices of farming. And then something that we hadn't even really planned on talking about, but I saw in your introduction that you'd said you've been a vegetarian since the 70s. And I guess a lot of with the Ecological Lifestyle Immersion, trying to give people a step into kind of each category of their life, whether it's their clothing, whether it's their use of water, whether it's their food, kind of every facet of daily life. And then food's a big one. And so I feel like it would be a good thing for us to at least speak a little to the ecological benefits of a more plant-based diet, and not needing to, preach about vegetarian or just a moderate approach to, some of the benefits, both in health of body and ecology. And so, yeah.
Yeah. When I became a vegetarian, it was really quite by accident. I owned a restaurant and didn't have time to cook for myself. But I had roommates who said, "Hey, we'll do all the cooking," and they were vegetarians. So months went by when I hadn't eaten any meat, and I went, "Wow, I feel good." And then I started exploring kind of the underpinnings of the food system. This is about mid-70s, and realizing that how meat is raised is really atrocious. It's just awful what we're doing to animals so that we can raise meat. And this is so far away from ancient practices, or not even ancient practices, just historic practices, where farm animals lived on farms. It seems kind of funny, but that's really where they lived. And there's taking advantage of this kind of natural thing that happens. Farms need nutrition and generate waste, and animals need nutrition and generate waste. Each other's waste is the other's nutrition. There was a really linked relationship between growing vegetables and raising animals. And modern agriculture severed those things and created two different problems. Farms that need nutrition and generate waste. The nutrition has to be purchased. The waste has to be disposed of or deposited into the environment. And animals are the same. And the waste coming from animals is really, really bad. Some of the worst ecological things happening on the planet are really around confined animal husbandry. I hate to use that term. It's not even husbandry. It's abuse. And the animals are stressed out. All these stress hormones are in the meat. The meat is just raised kind of artificially with hormones and antibiotics because they're living in horribly despicable situations where disease is rampant. We're raising our food in these places that we don't want to visit, that you can smell from the freeway from dozens of miles away. This is where our meat's coming from. And so it was just really kind of recognizing that by eating meat, I was participating or encouraging that as a practice. So after I had kind of really understood that I'd stopped eating meat, then I started understanding that I didn't need to eat meat and that I didn't want to support those practices. I don't want to say that vegetarian is for everybody. I know people that need to eat meat. We all have different bodies and different nutritional needs. I'm an advocate for a plant-based diet, predominantly or entirely plant-based diets, but I don't want to be getting down on people who, for one reason or other, health reasons or cultural or religious reasons, that meat is part of their diet. I don't want to get down on them because I'd like to instead bring them up to a level of appreciating that there is meat being raised ethically now, which wasn't the case that long ago, but there is meat that's being raised ethically. And that doesn't address the problem of killing animals and all those things, and people have varying opinions on that. But I think that the closer we can eat to a vegetable diet, I've been doing it for 40 plus years. I'm fine and healthy. I can say that I don't miss meat. My body doesn't miss meat. I'm doing just fine. I'm in my 60s and healthy. It's possible. But this kind of cultural fetishness of eating meat, you have to have meat in every meal, is really, I think that's really part of humans' demise, and our assault on the planet is our need for that, our perceived need, how we think we need that all the time. We really don't. Get real. Let's just come back and eat some good vegetables and some grains and cereals and beans, and we can do fine. We'll be alive, and the planet is going to be a better place for it.
Yeah, I think it's like to just take that balanced approach to anything, and like not needing to demonize anybody and say, that I primarily eat a vegetarian diet, but I do eat meat here and there. And just if we can bring this awareness to the masses of, that's my interest in this program, and Local Earth is just millions of people becoming more aware of their choices and just how they eat, what types of energy they use, what types of materials they use to build their houses, all of these different facets of life. And just a common sense care for the planet of like, oh, maybe, I or somebody was raised eating meat 3 times a day, and that was just like, that's just what people know, that's what their family did, and not that anything was wrong, and maybe there just wasn't the education there that like, wow, this is actually can be pretty detrimental to the environment as a whole. And if you are a citizen of the planet that cares about the planet as a whole, like I think a lot of people are that, like they might just not realize maybe that some of their habits and practices are taking a toll, because there's 7 billion of us on the planet. So just that.
I completely agree. It's really all about education. If people really explore the topic and understand what's going on, what's being done in their name to provide them the food they're eating, and understanding other ways of doing things, I think we can make a lot of change, and we can do it pretty quickly.
I saw somebody in the comments had mentioned the movie Food Inc. I know I've seen Cowspiracy. Are there any of those films or documentaries that are kind of your favorite that you feel like share good information and education?
There's a movie out. It's a little dated now, but I found it really inspiring. It's called The Power of Community. It's a story that takes place in Cuba. Prior to the dissolution of the Soviet Union, most of the food that Cubans were eating was imported from the Soviet Union. Agricultural subsidies and, making sure Russian farmers are, paid and all that. But when the Soviet Union dissolved, Cubans couldn't get food from the Soviet Union anymore. So what they did, they started growing their own food, and they started converting vacant lots and front yards and backyards and rooftops and parklands and all kinds of areas in and around the cities and where the people lived. And they started growing gardens. And the food, there was so much food grown, the Cubans were eating better than before the food system changed on them. So I think that's kind of an example of kind of a shift that can happen, and it can happen suddenly. Now, I hope it doesn't have to happen because of a crisis. We can choose to do these things in scheduled and measured ways. We can change the food system step by step. Humans don't tend to do that, but we can all make choices right now and change where our food comes from.
So I'm reading through a few of the questions over here in the comments, and one that I'm not sure how we could tie it into the kind of the ecological sustainability component, but it has been a present issue here at the village as well, of like trying to grow food at a more local scale, even on your own property or village, and learning how to deal with the squirrels and the rabbits and the gophers and the birds and the pests that eat it. And so, what are your thoughts in kind of how we stay in balance with the natural, with ecosystem, and deal with those factors when maybe we are trying to grow some of our own food?
Yeah. The biggest problem we've had historically at Wild Willow Farm was everything we ate was eaten by bunny rabbits. From the very first things we planted to even now. So our approach has been set up levels of exclusion, excluding them as much as possible from where we're growing food. It's taken us years, but we finally have fencing around our growing areas that largely keep the bunny rabbits and the squirrels out. It's not that we don't have them, but they're just that we're growing more food, and their populations have forgotten what was growing there. I think that's part of it, is that squirrels and rabbits know where you're growing food. So you have to have some generational memory loss, by excluding these animals from your farm, such that the children don't know that it's there, and then they stop wanting to get in there to eat the good stuff you're growing. So there's lots of different approaches that are taken. Yeah, pests are a problem, no doubt, and you're going to have some loss. Some people don't want to shoot them or kill them. I get that. Trapping is another way you can trap them and take them to remote areas and release them so that you're not killing them. I think there's some other kind of cruelty involved in that, but I think it's important to understand that farming is not a vegan thing. First of all, when you make a farm, you're scraping away the wild stuff that was there, all the things that were living on that land to grow a farm. So right away, you're killing things. Farmers have to trap gophers. They have to protect themselves against furry things that will eat their food. There just really isn't any option other than either excluding them or killing them. It's a little shocking, I know, but just if you're growing food on a piece of land, there's something that was there before that isn't there now. So, just by that nature alone, there's some loss of life. And that's just one of the trade-offs we make as human beings to grow food. So getting as comfortable as you can with that is really important. It's it's hard for a lot of people. I get it. And most people, especially those who are really militant about it, just choose to not really see that truth. They exclude that from what they're willing to see.
Yeah. And I guess as I've been hearing you speak to this, it did tie into, in my mind, how it connects to the concept of, regenerative agriculture and the more appropriate scales of food production rather than large scale commercial monocrops is we have to deal with those things at a different scale. When you maybe do have 100 acres of one crop that you just have killed everything else and there's no biodiversity, maybe there's not as much of a concern with some of those because they've gotten rid of everything and there is that efficiency in that system, but forgetting about all the other facets of the harm to our planet and our environment that does take. So when we do say we're going to try to be more responsible about these smaller scale farms and regenerative practices, those are issues that really do need to be dealt with, because we've totally had that situation up here at the village and put a lot of time and energy into growing things, and then the one night the rabbits and squirrels come in and it's all gone. So
it's all gone.
Yeah.
Yeah. How heartbreaking is that?
Yeah.
How expensive is that?
Yeah.
a lot of effort, human labor, and the expense of putting that crop in the ground and bringing it up to a tasty place for rabbits. Small farms can't put up with that kind of loss very, very long, because farms are businesses. It's just the way it is.
Yep. Well, we're close to an hour, and I know you've been fighting a little bit of a cold or something. I don't want to keep you up too late, but if we want to go for a few more minutes, we can start to wrap up. If you have any closing ideas that you want to make sure that you can share, we can browse through and see if there's any questions from anybody that's on the call right now, and kind of start figuring out how we want to kind of conclude it and have a call to action. And yeah.
Well, I like to talk about the food, about food and the value of culture. I don't think that our culture values food very much. And kind of to explain that, I want to go back into ancient times, times even before there was agriculture, and certainly all the times since there's been agriculture. And then for every culture in the history of the world that could identify itself as a culture, every kind of cultural celebration, every meaningful moment that culture had was celebrated with food. And it was celebrated with not just food, but the best food, the prize animals, the biggest pumpkins, the tastiest squash, whatever it is that the farmers could elevate their culture with, they proudly brought to their cultural center, and they served it to their community. And it was a celebration of the vitality and the health and the nurturing quality that we bring into a culture to create its greatness. Now, American culture, whether it's the Super Bowl or a graduation or a funeral or a birth, food is present. But what do we bring to that celebration? And kind of to my great disappointment, it seems to be okay to bring a $2 bag of chips to the culture. Yeah. To celebrate the meaningfulness of our culture. We try to find what's cheap and convenient and easy, kind of as a write-off to get us into the door of our culture, but really without kind of the intent and the purpose and the meaning of what the culture brings to us. My mom used to, for the church potluck, she would spend all day making her favorite meal. It was the most important thing she could do. And she brought it into the church hall, and all the other mothers had made their favorite pies and casseroles. And it was really this feast that we just celebrated. Oh my God, this is the best day ever. Now, the potlucks, it's that $2 bag of chips. Get your, go to Trader Joe's, stop in, get your $2 bag of chips, and you're in. That to me is a really revealing expression of how much we value our culture. I would love to see us do better. I think that we can come back to a time when food expresses our highest aspirations, the importance that we have in the communities that surround us, that make us into the humans that we are. Food can be all that. Food is all of that. We have culture because of food. Let's not spoil it by this race to the bottom of the cheapest, least healthy food that we can get.
And Wild Willow Farm is a great place where we can come and experience that, right? With like the monthly potlucks and gatherings, and there's an upcoming really great gathering, the soil shindig.
Yeah. So Wild Willow Farm we're open to the public. We're not some farm that's so far away that you don't know where we are. We're about 20 minutes from downtown San Diego, right up against the Mexican border. You can see the streets of Tijuana from the farm. We're the most southwest farm in the continental United States. And sadly, we're the last farm left in the Tijuana River Valley, a valley that used to be populated with farms. But we want people to come to the farm. We have classes virtually every weekend of the year. We run a farm school where you can enroll and take simple courses that will change your life. You will not look at food the same way by going through one of our Farming 101 courses. We teach and talk about the food system and how to fix it, how we can become these higher evolved humans that are growing food ecologically. Every Saturday at Wild Willow Farm, excuse me, you can come volunteer. Come in the morning. We'll get you doing some kind of a farmy task and talk to you about food. You can experience nature in remarkable ways and maybe get engaged in some kind of cool little agricultural project. Like last Saturday, we had some volunteers who were shelling beans. We had grown crops of beans. We wanted to save the seeds. So it was a really cool project with volunteers opening up beans and saving the seeds. The week before, we were doing that same thing with amaranth, sifting and winnowing amaranth so that we could set aside seed for the next crops. So we do those kinds of things. We want you to engage with food in really unusual and interesting ways. So please come down to Wild Willow Farm. wildwillowfarm.org will give you all you need to know, and you can come down. I'd love to see everybody at the farm.
Awesome. And so the soil shindig is the 2 Saturdays from now, the 17th, right?
Yeah, about 10 days from now. So it's we're doing that in partnership with the Resource Conservation District of Greater San Diego County. We're blessed to be adjacent to the largest community garden in San Diego County. That's the Tijuana River Valley Community Garden. They were the largest when they were 5 acres with huge plots, hundreds of tenant farmers, and now they're expanding to be a 10-acre community garden. It's a really remarkable place. I encourage people to just take the afternoon off and walk up and down the aisles of that community garden because there's growers from all over the world who are growing food there. So you can walk between the different plots and get a sense of the cultures where these people came from. Even if you don't see the people themselves, you can see the foods they grow and figure out the cultures they came from. So the Resource Conservation District and Wild Willow Farm are getting together for a free public event. It's November 17 from 1 p.m. to 6 p.m. We have free classes and lectures and tours and talks, panel discussion. So make a day of it. Bring the family. It's bike friendly. Bring your bikes. We'll have a food truck there serving food, all kinds of fun stuff. It's just a fun day. This will be our 4th time doing it. It's become kind of a cornerstone of our work down there. We celebrate. It's kind of our harvest festival in a way. So please, if you're not doing anything, come on down and check us out. Love seeing people on the farm.
Awesome. Well, Mel, thank you so much for such an enthusiastic and heartfelt discussion and share from you. I really, you know how much I appreciate you as a human being, and you have so much wisdom to share. It's nice to be here in this space with you and hear your wisdom.
Well, Joshua, this has been fabulous. I don't know if you can tell, I love talking about this stuff. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to add my voice into the conversation.
Heck yeah. So we'll start to close up this discussion, and anybody who's watching this, we're going to share. We'll share this video tomorrow on YouTube and social media. And so anybody who wasn't able to watch it live tonight, I'll post a little link in the chat window right now for anybody that's on live. You can check that. And anybody who sees this later, I'll put Mel's contact information and mine in the chat window right here as well, if you would like to contact us. And we're going to do one of these every month, and each month we go in person to support some type of event or organization that we can learn about that's relevant to that month's topic. So last month we did a water activity. This is going to be based on food. So we're going to try to get as many people as we can to come down to the soil shindig and celebrate with Mel and the family, the beauty of the food and the farm.
You're doing
So
great work, Josh. I really am treasured to know you, and you're one of my favorite people. So keep up the good work.
thank you, brother. Thank you so much. So blessings to you, Mel, and everybody out there in the world. And may we create a healthy, harmonious, happy world together.
Let's do it.
All right. Aloha, brother.
Aloha.